All right. Good morning again, everybody. My name's Tarek. I'm alcoholic. It's time to introduce our speaker for today. I've invited a gentleman I met 2 years ago in 2024. I met him at a sponsorship weekend that's held actually here in Alabama. And man, one of those people you meet, just super open heart, you can tell. And then my sponsor is a big fan of his, and I started listening to some of his talks, and then I met him. I saw him again last year, and I've heard him share at those sponsorship weekends, and I decided to approach him and this other gentleman named Harold to lead my retreat this year, and I'm so excited about it. And I know you guys got to hear Harold a couple months ago, and he was phenomenal. And now we're going to have Jimmy share with us this morning. And so with that, I give you Jimmy A. from New Jersey. Jimmy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Terry. Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy. I'm alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober. And it's always customary where I come from to let you know that I have a home group called the Design for Living Group on the Jersey Shore. I have a sponsor by the name of Bob B. from St. Paul, Minnesota. I sponsor a lot of guys. And most importantly, I've been sober since my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was on March 28th, 1987. So if you count the days up, it's 14,358 days, one day at a time. And I never say that, but I don't know why. You guys, when I hear people say day counts, I say, I wonder what my day count is. So thank God for a Grapevine app. I just popped that up and it tells me how many days I've been sober. I don't know about sane, but I've been not drinking. And thank you for having me here today. I guess I'm the uncle or great uncle to many of you. Somehow that all works out. Sober uncle, something like that. Ralph's my sober brother, and Bob's our sponsor. And in 2 weeks, we'll be down in Alabama and Birmingham, and I'm looking forward to that. And hopefully I see some of you guys down there. And I've got about 250 guys coming down there, and it's going to be a great weekend. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I'm glad to be here. And TAREK, I always say your name wrong. I don't know why. But he gave me the open window of, talk about whatever you want to talk about. And, again, I meditate every time before I speak. I have to quiet my mind. And I just woke up like an hour ago. And, there's a certain meditation I put on. I like guided meditations. And there's a certain meditation. And in the middle of the meditation, this gentleman always says the same thing. He gives the thought for the day. And the thought for today came from Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein said there's only two ways to live your life. All right. One way is that nothing is a miracle. And the other way is that everything's a miracle. So on a beautiful Sunday morning, as we sit here today as a group, and as we get on with our day today with all the things that we have to do and going to do and get to do, how am I going to look at my day today? And so what that made me think of about is who showed up yesterday, right? If I'm living in the light or if I'm living in the sunlight, the spirit, what does that actually look like? And have I taken certain disciplines to stay in the light, right? Yesterday, maybe you had a bad day. Yesterday, maybe you had a fight with your wife or girlfriend. Maybe yesterday you had some work problems. Maybe yesterday you had some family problems. Maybe yesterday you had some, whatever problems, right? Did I take the time to stop and pause and to bring God into that and to take a look at what's really going on in my life? Did I call my sponsor? Was I accountable to my sponsor? Did I talk to my road dogs and talk about what's going on in my life? Or did I just think that, I could handle this myself and just plow through the day, And then at night, did I really do an evening review? Did I really look at my day, right? Because I can guarantee you this, one of the things I have learned through all these years is that the man who goes to bed angry wakes up angry. So have I really taken a snapshot of my day and shared that with my sponsor, or have I inventoried my life? We have entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow and understand. What does that mean? Well, grow, Have I have a deeper insight into myself, into others, and more importantly, into God? And then what does that effectiveness look like? Am I bringing these principles or these spiritual principles into all my life and out to others? Have I grown as an individual, a sober man in this world? Or am I stuck in my sobriety? Because a lot of us get stuck in our sobriety, right? We just, for whatever reason, we just take our will back, and all of a sudden we're back in the director's chair, and all of a sudden we're trying to run the show. Many of you will walk into a meeting this week, and you might look at that shade on the wall. You might read that 10th step. Continue to take personal inventory. When we were wrong, promptly admit it. Sounds like we just, we screw up, maybe make an amends, maybe call my sponsor on it, maybe say I'm sorry and move on with our day. And, nothing's further from the truth, especially when you read the literature. The literature says we've entered the world of the spirit. We've had a spiritual awakening as a result of the first 9 steps, right? What do those promises look like? There's a lot of different ways to inventory yourself, right? We always, stress, obviously, the 4th step, a 10th step inventory, an 11th step evening review. But we could turn just about every word in a big book into a question and ask ourselves, where do we stand right now? And I think one of the best inventories we could do is to look at those 12 promises after the 9th step and turn them into a question. And ask myself, am I having trouble with personal relationships? Right? Can I control my emotional nature? Am I still prey to misery and depression? Can I make a living? Do I still have feelings of uselessness? Am I still filled with fear? Am I still unhappy? Am I not of real help to other people? So I could take those questions and I could ask myself. And, not to beat yourself up or to look at that and say, maybe that stuff has not occurred in my life. Well, then maybe is it possible that it's time to go through the steps again? If I'm not experiencing the 12 promises after the 9th step, is it possible that maybe I need to go through the steps again? Maybe is it possible that I'm trying to hang my hat on an inventory that I did 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Is it possible that maybe I need to finish those amends that are still sitting on that piece of paper in my 8-step list that I keep on procrastinating on? Or maybe fear is blocking me from calling her up or paying back their money. Is it possible that, that size 12 shoe that keeps on going up my butt from my sponsor who keeps on yelling at me to get that inventory done? Maybe I'm just procrastinating because I don't want to do it. Whatever the case may be. Or worst of all, maybe I'm still holding on to secrets. Am I still holding on to secrets? Because if we've entered the world of the spirit and I've had a spiritual experience, I should be living my life like it's in the light. Now, many of us put our steps, many of us walk back into the dark on a daily basis, but that's why we have these disciplines of 10, 11, and 12 to get back into the light. When I got sober in 1987, there wasn't great stress about the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Meetings back in New Jersey, back in those days, with speaker meetings, discussion meetings. Here and here, there was a 12 and 12 meeting. It wasn't until 1991 when Joe and Charlie came through the Northeast that people started to get fired up about recovery through the 12 steps in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll never forget, I was doing a talk on the 2nd step. Now, I have no relationship with God. Matter of fact, I don't even need to talk. I don't even need to work the steps to talk about a step. That's the kind of guy I was back then. I just make shit up. Lie to every one of you. I'm paralyzed by what you think of me. I could tell some jokes if I need to. I could throw a few lines out of the 12 and 12. But after this meeting, I'm standing up there and, the lines coming up. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. And this guy walks up to me and eyeball to eyeball. And I won't say this at a podium or in a meeting, but he just looked at me and goes, "You're fucked." And I wanted to start a fist fight in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous because I don't know how to face confrontation without violence. I don't know how to face resistance without resistance. But again, God does for me what I could never do for myself. I look at this man and I say, "You're right. I need help." And what happened to me was that next day I went to this little railroad room apartment on the Jersey side of the Hudson River overlooking New York City. And I'm getting a spiritual test. And the spiritual test looked something like this. This man was peppering me with a few questions. And the first question he asked me was, Jimmy, how long can you hold your breath? How long can you hold your breath? How long can you be in a 12-step program and not work the 12 steps? What does your relationship with God look like? What makes you alcoholic? Best I could stammer out of my mouth was, I drank too much. I had no idea about this physical allergy, this mental obsession. I had no knowledge of any of that stuff, right? And then he looked at me and he asked me a question that many of you guys might not believe, but this, like I said, this is the way it was back in the 80s, back in my hometown. He looked at me and said, where's your big book? And I looked at him and I said, what's a big book? Now, I'm sure there was a book on a literature table or a podium or something like that, but we weren't opening that book back then. But then he asked me a question, or it was more of a consideration. He said to me, Jimmy, if AA works, why do you have so many problems? Because the truth of the matter is, I'm not working AA. I've fallen under the delusion. You see, alcoholism doesn't come in a bottle. It comes in my mind. And my mind is filled with a lot of delusions and distortions about a lot of things. And it's driven by a lot of old ideas that I have about everything. And one of the biggest delusions I had in my early recovery is I think that abstinence is the solution to a spiritual malady. I think just not drinking and taking drugs, I'm going to be okay. Well, I'm 5 years sober at this point. I'm 5 years active member of a group, dying in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, dying of something we don't talk about. Well, back then we didn't talk about. Something I didn't even really understand is that I'm dying from this thing called untreated alcoholism. And what happened to me on this particular day was this guy started to paint me into the corner about me and my life and the way I was living my life, to the point where I had no choice but to take one of those two alternatives. He said, Jimmy, keep living the way you're living. Good luck if you even stay sober, or accept this spiritual way of living. You know, there's this unknown thing that we don't understand sometimes when we're new to in our recoveries. You know, be willing to step into the mystery of spirituality. Because you see, my story is probably a lot like a lot of your stories. And I think it's, you know, I've been around long enough and I know enough people to know that none of us get on a spiritual rocket ship and go way up, up, up and away. I think many of our recoveries are. We grow, we hit walls, we grow, we hit walls. And I think it's these constant surrenders of turning back to God, turning back, trying to get out of the darkness, using 10, 11, and 12, the disciplines to get back into the light, right? Because it's really easy to fall off, right? It's really easy to step out of the herd of my recovery. It's really easy to walk away from all the men that are helping me, right? We see it all the time. But I sat with this guy. His name was Bill Grace. And he was from St. Paul, Minnesota, ironically, where my sponsor is from now. And he just painted this picture of what my recovery. He talked about the two goals of Alcoholics Anonymous. This was his opinion, of course, kind of my opinion today, right? The first goal is the obvious one. Don't pick up the first one, right? That sounds very simple. But the second goal is the goal we all want to attain, and that's to have this spiritual experience, this psychic change, personality change, whatever language you want to use. It's about a transformation, right? And to go from the dark to the light, right? Now, we have a book called Daily Reflections in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And if you turn to the page to May 1st and look at that second paragraph, I think it's one of the most powerful readings I've ever read. You know, we say that about everything we read, but in this particular case, this really just, I don't know, I've read this a million times and it really hits me right between the eyes. It says, it's a side of myself that I refuse to look at that rules me, whether that's fear, resentment, sexual behaviors, financial behaviors, whatever the case may be. I must be willing to look at the dark side in order to heal my mind and my heart, because that's the road to freedom. I must walk into darkness to find the light, and I got to walk into fear to find peace. You know, the way the old timers used to say that is, you know, AA or whatever fellowship you're in, it's, you know, it's like a big bonfire, right? A lot of people are around a bonfire, but eventually that bonfire is going to go out. But if you really want to change, if you really want an experience with God, if you really want to step into the light and have this transformation, you've got to walk through that fire and get your ass burnt and feel the uncomfortability of change. Now, there's two things there's really one thing I can't do for anyone on this call. None of you could do it for me, and none of you could do it for each other. And that's put willingness in your heart, right? Willingness is an inside job. And as Ralph would say, you know, what makes us willing? A good whooped ass. but circumstances, being sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I bring this up for a reason. Where are you on, I don't even know what today's date is, July 19th at, in 9:25 in the morning. Where are you? In the light or in the darkness, right? And I think that's really an important place that we have to look, right? Am I not experiencing these promises? Am I not experiencing any of the promises that are in our literature? Have I fallen out of the loop when it comes to my recovery? Am I struggling, but my ego and my pride are now in the way, and I'm not talking to the men in my life about what's really going on, right? So 10, 11, 12, they become the disciplines, the things I need to do on a daily basis to get back into the light, right? Because as we know, nothing grows in the dark. And, you said you had Harold on here a couple of weeks ago. Me and Harold are close friends. I mean, Harold does this whole thing about delusions and, this whole thing about our thinking mind and the things that block us from being free, right? And whether that's in relationships or whether that's in work or whether that's with family issues or money issues or sex issues or whatever the case may be, we have problems. Why do we have problems? Well, as Bill Wilson says, because we're problem people, right? But a man put a spiritual toolbox next to my feet, and I became willing to pick up that toolbox, and I started to look at myself in a way I've never looked. So as I sat with this guy, Bill, I was willing to start looking at the darkness of my life. I was willing to go in and start seeing the things that were blocking me from God and blocking me from you. To uncover, discover, and discard, as we say, to bring down the walls. Anyone have walls in this room? I'll tell you my walls. I got walls of alibis. I got walls of excuses. I got walls of blame. I got walls of rationalization and justification. And worst of all, and especially if you have double-digit sobriety, I still play the role of the victim, right? Nothing's my fault. And I'm just that type of guy that's always blamed everyone for the way I feel. I always make a joke when I tell my story. I was born perfect, but I was quickly handed over to these two character defects called mom and dad, right? I blamed my parents. And then from there on to whenever, it was always someone else's fault. I can't take stock honestly. And why is that? I'm afraid. That's the bottom line. And I'm sure that's the bottom line with everyone that's on this call right now. Fear. The evil and corroding thread. I grow up in a time when I'm 68 years old. I grew up in a very blue collar, tough neighborhood. Everyone's a union worker. Everyone's a cop. Everyone's a fireman. Everyone's a criminal. I mean, I never saw a guy go to work in a jacket and tie. And the only requirement for membership in my neighborhood was 5 or more kids. So there was these big families and these big parties all the time. And there was always something going on, whether it was a birthday party, a christening, a graduate, you name it. And the thing that was at every event was King Alcohol. And again, we say this line quite often that alcoholism or even drug addiction is a disease of perception. The way I look at things is just screwed up. Right? And the way I would look at alcohol as a young kid, 6, 7, 8 years old, is that I equate alcohol to fun. And why I say that is because I would watch my old man, I would watch the neighbors, I watched my mom and her friends take a few drinks, and it seemed like there was an ease and comfort that came once they started to drink. Right? It just seemed like life was bearable. It seemed like there was a certain freedom they had when they did that. Right? Now I'm growing up in this house, and I got this guy called Dad. My dad is cunning, baffling, and powerful. My old man's a lunatic. My old man is a tough guy, right? He's a butcher. He always has blood on him. The best way I describe my father is, I don't know if he grabbed a guy at a red light that day and beat him up, or he slaughtered a cow that afternoon, but he always had blood on him, right? Typical butcher, right? But what I would witness on a daily basis, every night, 5 o'clock, my dad would walk in the house huffing and puffing about something. And my mom would make these 2 pitchers, one called martinis and the other one called Manhattans. And what I would witness is my old man would walk in and take that first drink. And all of a sudden he became a different guy. The ease and comfort hit him, right? And all of a sudden he became a guy that wanted to have a catch in the backyard. Or maybe he talked about his day. My old man was that generation. He would have been 100 years old if he was alive today. He was a World War II vet. And not to throw that generation under the bus, but he just didn't talk about anything, really. A great provider, put 5 of us through major universities, United States, right? But he was just a tough, tough man. Maybe he had post-traumatic stress. Who knows? We didn't use those words back in those days, right? He just had a lot of stuff going on, and he was shut down emotionally. Never talked about anything. But give him a few drinks, it was different. But don't let me fool you. There were those days, and those days looked something like this. My old man would take a drink, and all of a sudden, kitchen plates would be flying across my kitchen. Kitchen chairs would be flying across my kitchen. If he grabbed one of us young kids, we'd be flying across the kitchen. So on any given day, about 5:01, 5:02 in my house, me, my two brothers and two sisters would be under the covers waiting for the tornado to roar through the house. And then when everything seemed to settle down, we'd walk out into the kitchen. We'd walk out into the living room. Hey, Mom, ain't it grand? The wind stopped blowing, right? And we would never talk about what just occurred in my house. Now, none of that makes me alcoholic, but I'm a kid that grows up with a tremendous amount of fear. Fear of big men, fear of violence, fear of loud noises, fear, the evil and corroding threat. I'm a kid that grows up with a lot of insecurity and inadequacies about myself. It's not like I needed to be nurtured or anything like that. I just had these feelings. I got two brothers that are relentlessly bullying me my whole life, basically. I just have those feelings. How many of us walk into our first meeting and we start talking about ourselves, and it's always that, oh, I don't feel, I'm not good enough. I'm not this. I'm not that. We have that whole list of bullshit, right? But worst of all, I'm a kid that grows up with secrets. You see, if you grow up in my family, you grow up in my neighborhood, really, what goes on in your house never leaves your house. So from a young age, you learn how to internalize your emotions. You learn how to push this stuff down. And see, I'm not taught I don't even know the right word. I'm not taught a way of how do I express myself, right? The only way I learned to express myself is at the age of 13, I have my first drink. I'm in a cemetery with 5 kids. And here comes that first bottle of Colt 45 malt liquor. Here comes that second bottle, Mohawk Blackberry Brandy. And what I could tell you about my first day drinking at the age of 13 is I blacked out, puked purple for about 2 weeks. My father beat the crap out of me. My mother apparently grounded me for life, but the hook was in. I found the magic elixir, just like everyone on this call right now. I found that thing, whatever your thing is, that settled this thing down. And I don't know what this thing is. I don't learn that until I come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and meet some of those old timers. And they would say things like this, that alcoholism is nothing more than a soul sickness caused by a separation from God and a disconnect from each other. The walls I just talked about, I've had walls my whole life. And I'm not coming out and I'm not letting you in. And I become the chameleon. I know there's no chameleons in Georgia or Illinois or wherever you guys are from. I think it may be just a Jersey thing. We always pretend to be someone we're not. I know you guys are not like that, but I'm like that, right? Why? Because of these feelings of insecurity, inadequacy, you name it, right? And little did I know that I just stepped on a path that goes straight to pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. If you're new on here, all that means is I went straight to hell. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't have a great time drinking and drugging. I had a great time drinking and drugging. I had a ball, right? Until it didn't become great. Concerts, ball games, trips to the beach, barbecues, you name it, man. We had fun. I had fun. Well, little by little, I didn't understand the disease of alcoholism. I didn't understand this progressive illness that I suffer from. I didn't understand the physical allergy towards having the next one. And worse than that, I'm a kid that grows up in a time when your mom would open up the door at 8 o'clock in the morning, boot all of us out. She knew we'd come back eventually. But my whole young life was on the streets. And so I become a guy that's, attracted to that. I'm attracted to the street life. I'm attracted to robbing money. I have 2 words that I have a real problem with: private property. So I become a little criminal and I steal things and again, I want to be part of rather than separate from. It's the nature of our illness. My ego, my pride wants us dead, but will settle for me drunk, and it'll use anything and everything to get me separate from you, right? So here I am, I'm growing up, I'm a criminal, I got the progressive, not only is my drinking progressive, my behaviors are progressive. Now I'm starting to do things that are really off the wall, right? Criminally and stealing. It's not like my parents ever sat me down and said, this is how you rob a house or a car or a freight train or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, it just became a part of life. And people started to move on with their life. Friends of mine, they got jobs on Wall Street. They met her. They got the house, the kids, blah, blah, blah. And I'm stuck to the bar because, I'm taking that dreaded first drink. And when I came to AA and I heard the first drink get you drunk, I thought that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Now, I could agree it might be the last 20, the outside issues, all that stuff. There's no way in hell that, the first drinks get me loaded. But little do I find out that that's the truth. So, I'm not going to bore you with the whole story, but by the end of my drinking, after 16 years, I'm that guy. And I know there's no one like this on this call, but I believe that there's something out there that's going to fix this in here. So this attachment to the materialistic world, thinking that money, cars, women, alcohol, drugs, you name it, is going to fix this hole in my soul, as they say, right? And I'm on the chase for all of that stuff. So in the middle of my insanity, the delusional mind, I think if I just get married, I'll settle down. And I walked into a marriage and, that's a story in itself, but I walked into a marriage and 4 months into the marriage, I walked out of the marriage because I didn't understand something about Jimmy, that I have the inability not to drink or take drugs. And what happens to me is I take off of Boca Raton, Florida. I'm 27 years old. I am so broken and so sick. But again, the delusional mind, it's everything out there. There's a problem, not in here. And I'm blaming everyone for my life because that's what I like to do, is blame everyone. I can't take stock, honestly. It's why a lot of us struggle when we come into AA and we're asked to do an inventory. I can't see me. I can only see you. You ever work with a guy and he can't even see? I don't know. Fourth column is baffling to me. I don't see my part in anything or my mistakes in anything, right? I struggle with that. So I take off of Boca and, I'm in this beautiful $1 million apartment that a friend of a family had. And, I'm looking at the beach, the boats, the bikinis. It seems like everything a man would want. And I'm a prisoner of this thing because I can't get out because I need a drink. See, I got an answer. It's called Johnny Walker Red. And all I need to do is crack the seal of that bottle. And I know when I take that first drink, that grandiosity that we all have comes back. And all of a sudden, that little kid comes back. And it's her fault. It's their fault. It's everyone's fault. Can't take stock, honestly. And so what happens to me is I make a decision to come back to Jersey. And, I didn't know what to do. I'm living in fear. Got a wife in limbo. Haven't talked to my family in I don't know how long. And so my idea, one of my alcoholic ideas is just to lay low, come back, stay at someone's house, whatever, right? And little did I know that for the next 19 months of my life, I would live homeless on the streets of New York City and in New Jersey, doing, as Ralph would always say, the aimless walk. And if you've been on the streets one night, you know that one night for anyone, one night on the street is too much for anyone. Traumatic, dehumanizing, cold, hungry. I mean, there's 1,000,001 adjectives to what was going on. Selling my blood, stealing, getting beat up. I was at where was I? I was somewhere, and this guy was telling a story. And, you have these hidden things that you forget about. And, man, he said something that it brought back a memory that I completely forgot. I never even talk about it. And, whenever I talk, whatever, and back in the 80s, New York City wasn't the place to be. I tell you, it was prostitutes and drug addiction and peep shows. Now, I know for some of you guys, that sounds like Disney World, but the truth of the matter, it was a rough place, right? And there used to be Penn Station, right? It was a train station, and we'll take this walk to Madison Square Garden, right? And this hallway was like a terror walk, and even for a guy like me, right? I'll never forget stumbling through there. I'm like, I got long hair, I got a big beard. I'm about 140 pounds. I'm 6'4". 140 pounds doesn't look good on a 6'4" guy, And I'm stumbling through, and I see a homeless guy, laying on the thing, and he has 3 cans of beer, and I can see the tops of the beer, and I go down to reach him, and he comes up with a knife, and he gets me in the back, and he stabs me in my back. And thank God the New York City Police Department was like 15 yards away. They grabbed me and they brought me to. But I tell you that for a reason, because I was at a point in my life, like maybe some of you guys, where if I died on that day, you did me a favor. It did me a favor, because the way I was living my life, 27, 28 years old, it was just kill me now. I had no hope, and there's nothing worse for any of us to have no hope, drunk or sober, that there's no way out, that there's not an answer, that there is no God, right? And what happened to me is, I walked into a bar one day and a guy told me that they're hiring people like me in Newark Airport. People like us. It used to be an old airline called People's Express that would hire guys like us, and the job was to unload the airplanes or the luggage and put it into the airplane. And People's Express would hire us. It was crazy. This is the 80s, and I'll never forget, I went to the airport with two guys. We stole a car. I like to say borrow. The cops say stolen, but the window was open and the keys were in it. So we just took the car and we went out to Newark Airport, and we're a mess. We're a mess. The interview process looks something like this. Can you lift a suitcase? Yeah, you're hired. I mean, that's what it was like back then. But I tell you this for a reason, because I'll never forget walking out of that little interview, whatever the guy asked me. You could just imagine Newark Airport. Just put yourself in the middle of Atlanta Airport, right? That's a big one. And I'm sitting, I sit in a metal chair. I couldn't tell you how I felt. I'm 29 years old. I just turned 29 years old. Couldn't tell you how you felt. It wasn't until I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and eventually opened up that blue book. When I turned to page 8 and I read Bill's story, and Bill puts words to his first step experience. I think puts really words to all our first step experience. When he says, no words could tell the loneliness and despair I felt in a bit of morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I met my match. I was overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And for the first time in my life, at the age of 29 years old, in the middle of Newark Airport, I think drinking's a problem. Now, a blind man can see that, but aren't we the last to see our problems? When all of a sudden, a complete stranger sat next to me. And after a couple of minutes, this guy looked at me and goes, what's wrong with you? People weren't asking me how my 401k was doing or how that new car I just bought was. Dude, what's wrong with you? And I spit my life story up on this guy, and he goes, I have the answer for you. And I said, what's that? Pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil. This is pre-cell phone, pre-beeper days. There was a time. And he wrote down the street and looked at me and said, you know where this is? Said, it's my old neighborhood. Then he asked me a very important question. He goes, is it possible for you not to take a drink the rest of this day? And I was honest with him. I said, I want to drink right now. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning. He said, try not to drink and be in front of this address at 7 o'clock tonight. And what happened was 7 o'clock at night. I'm standing in front of that address, stone cold sober. My knees are knocking, my stomach's churning, my mind's going a million miles an hour. Was I even in Newark Airport? I was so shot out, delirious. I was a mess. When all of a sudden, a 1979 Chevy Impala pulls up, and a stranger's driving a car, and there's a couple other strangers in the car. And they rolled up on me, and they rolled the window down, and they said the most spiritual thing you'll ever hear in Alcoholics Anonymous, or really anywhere. Get in the car. And I got in the car with these guys. And they took me to my first meeting, March 28, 1987. I've been sober ever since. And I walked into that meeting. It was like a grammar school reunion. I thought you died. I thought you were in prison. I mean, it was like kind of amazing. But I was glad I knew people there in there. It made me feel a little bit more comfortable. But I'll tell you, that's where the journey started. And I like to tell you that, like I said earlier, I got on some spiritual rocket ship and went up and away. But I didn't. My life got back in order. I got back with that wife, believe it or not. I'll tell you that's kind of a funny story. I haven't seen her in years now. We're still legally married, and I see her walking out of an Al-Anon meeting. And she sees me, and she goes, hey, I heard you were getting sober. And you know what I heard her say? Why don't you move back home today? Kind of funny, right? I mean, that's the mind of the alcoholic, right? But it took time, a lot of therapy, a lot of all that crap, and we eventually got back. We eventually got the house and the kids and all that stuff. And, to the untrained eye, it looks like normal living is a solution to alcoholism and drug addiction, right? To the untrained eye, attainment of materialistic things looks like the answer to my problems, right? The house, the job, the car, 2 little AA kids who are now 37 and 34. I mean, it looks like on paper that that's the answer to my problems, right? I haven't worked the steps. I'm still filled with fear. I still got insecurities. And worst of all, I'm walking around AA with secrets. And if you said to me, Jimmy, how you doing? I'll tell you everything is great, as the veins are about to pop out of my neck. I'm dying in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, afraid to talk about what's really going on, until I found a man, or a man found me, or God put a guy in my life that sat me down and gave me the truth. And as I started to go through those steps, I started to uncover, discover, and discard the things that are blocking me from God. I did that inventory. Prior to that, he said, tell me a time when you really saw God show up in your life. And, I'm a Catholic who believes in God, but what does God have to do with this? Right? I couldn't connect the dots on that. But I had a time when I was 18 months sober. See, I hated my father. I had daddy issues. And for you guys who are down in Alabama next week, in 2 weeks, me and my buddy Tommy, who's doing this retreat, we like to do this little section called daddy issues. And it could be mommy issues. It could be wife issues. I mean, it's just issues. It's relationships, right? We all have problems with that. But I had problems with my old man, right? But something happened when I met you guys. And I started to bring you home. And I started to talk about this new way of life that I was entering. And I started to talk about recovery. And I started to talk about a lot of things that my old man, the only thing he ever heard was, where's he locked up? That's all he ever knew from my mother. My mother was very protective of me. She didn't want to bring him in anything because he would just blow a gasket, right? But here we are, and no big deal. He'd ask me, did you watch a Yankee game tonight? Or did you watch the football game this afternoon? Or whatever. It was simple stuff. But I'm 18 months sober and I walk in the house and I find my father dead. 63 years old, right? Now I'm programmed. I come from a time in AA when 12-step calls were a regular thing. Grabbing drunks and bringing them to AA meetings. Not the treatment centers, not the detoxes. We would carry a pint of whiskey, half a pint of whiskey in a glove compartment in case that guy went off the rails, just to get his shakes down. We didn't have the affordability we didn't have treatment centers like they do on every corner now, right? We had bars in every corner. We just didn't have treatment centers like it is today. So we'd bring him to an AA meeting and he'd meet you and hopefully begin this new way of life. So I'm very well versed in a drunk that needs help. So here I am. I'm over my father. My sponsor, I call my sponsor. He says, call 911. Let's pray. Right? He's praying. Call 911. I'm crying, looking at my father. Right? When all of a sudden the first cop shows up. And the cop's taking information down. He looks at me. He says, hey, I don't see you walking the streets anymore. I said, yeah, I don't do that anymore. Then after a couple of minutes, he goes, matter of fact, I don't see you drinking on the corner or drinking in any bars anymore. I said, yeah, I don't do that. He goes, well, how do you do that? I said, well, I go to this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm 18 months sober, and apparently it's working. And when all of a sudden, the cop starts talking about his drinking. And he starts to talk about the unmanageability of his life and how he's jammed up on a job and how he's having problems at home and blah, blah, blah. Now, he doesn't live in my city. He moved out of the city, but I know the town he lives in because I've been in meetings there. And so I tell him about a meeting that's in his town that next day. And I tell him about a bunch of guys that I know that are in that town that he can meet if he goes that next day. And I left it at that, and I dealt with the death of my father. About 2 years ago, I'm in my home group. I have a huge home group. We have 300 people every Sunday night, big book study in Jersey, on the Jersey Shore. Right? The girls are over. It's a real pocket of enthusiasm. The girls are over there reading. The guys are over there reading. I'm up front line in my sponsees about something. And when all of a sudden I get a tap on my shoulder. And when I turn around, there's a guy standing there. He goes, hey, you know who I am? I said, I have no idea who you are. He goes, I've been looking for you. I said, really? Who are you? He goes, I'm the police officer that was with you on the day that your dad died. I said, really? He goes, I knew you moved. And I moved and I couldn't connect and I didn't know where you were. And I found out you lived down here and I came down here to see you. I said, well, what's up? He goes, I'm here to let you know that I went to that meeting that next day and I met those guys you talked about. And I've been sober for the last 34 years of my life. Now I don't have the power to get anyone sober and I don't have the power to get anyone drunk. But what I learned was my first spiritual lesson in that moment. That in order to get out of the darkness of my life, I need to serve others. And that God will use you without your permission. Now, the old timers used to throw out this little one-liners that I hated back then that I embrace today. And one of the old timers used to say this all the time, I need a drunk not to drink. And that sounds very simplistic, right? Now, I don't know if I was going to drink on the day I found my old man dead, but God knew I needed a drunk in my back pocket. And that has become the basis of my life, right? One drunk talking to another. Because I've been an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous for a very long time. And I've done a lot of things through the service structure. I've been a delegate. I could tell you all that crap. I could talk about traditions. I could lecture you on the concepts. I could talk about the world service, all that crap, right? I shouldn't say crap, but I could talk to you about all those things. But at the end of the day, I take all that stuff and I put it into what do you call that thing? Whatever, a filter or whatever. When it comes out at the bottom, it's really about one drunk talking to another, experiencing, sharing experience, strength, and hope. And so that's what my life has become. But that doesn't make me problem free. And that doesn't mean that I don't go back into the darkness of my life at times. Why? Because fear, more fear, right? And then fear will always manifest itself into some sort of resentment or anger or something like that. I hear a lot of you guys just addicts, right? Well, even if you were food addicts or gambling addicts or whatever, debtors anonymous. I mean, there's over 300 anonymous programs in the world with every problem in the world, right? But we all have one thing in common. And what that one thing in common is that we all have the inability, or maybe the inability, to control life. None of us can control life, right? It's a delusion that life is controllable and manageable. And the minute I get into the director's chair, the minute I step into that director's chair and think I can control life and life situations, well, I'm behind the eight ball again. God asked me to do one thing, right? And only one thing. Well, a couple of things. Number one, get out of the director's chair. Why? It doesn't work, right? Second shortest line out of literature. It doesn't work. It didn't work. Closely followed by the shortest line in the big book. Obviously. Is it obvious that playing God doesn't work? Yeah. Countless times I could look over my life and say it doesn't work. Well, why do I keep on getting into that director's chair? Why do I keep on trying to control and manage life knowing that I'm powerless over you and everyone else? I don't know what that is, right? But God asked me to do one job, right? He's the principal, I'm the agent. He's the big athlete, he's the movie star. He wants me to do one job since I'm the agent, get endorsements, get the one job I know I have to do is help his kids. And helping his kids just doesn't mean people in recovery. It means my neighbors. I just moved into a 55 and over, man. I got neighbors that are twice as old as me and I'm 68. I mean, there's people that need help, right? There's family members that need help. There's people in general that need help, right? So help his kids. And like any good father would do with his child, if I do that simple task of helping his kids, God will give me everything I need. Right? He'll take care of me. Now, I know that intellectually, but how come I always take my will back? How come I'm always willing to step back into the darkness of my life? Why do I let resentment or anger or any of that stuff get to me? If I have a resentment, if you have a grievance, or if you're just pissed off in general, three things are going on. Number one, taking everything personal, right? Making it all about me, right? Number two, I'm blaming you for the way I feel. Like you have that power to make me feel the way I think you want me to feel. But third is that I'm trying to control the situations in my life. So let's take a snapshot at that. Are there any things that are of disturbance on July 19th at 10 o'clock in the morning that I'm trying to control and manage? They're not just my way. And more importantly, where is God in any of that? See, I'm driven by a lot of old ideas about a lot of things, right? How many times do we say to a newcomer, are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol or drugs? They shake their head like a bobblehead doll. Yep. Do we ever explain that? What that means? What do any lengths really look like? Well, when you read our literature, Bill lays out maybe 12, 14, 15, 20 times. We beg you to lay aside your prejudice, your old ideas towards what? Not only God, but everything. Because when I think my life should look a certain way when it comes to my health, relationships, money, family, work, or even my recovery program, and it doesn't look the way I think it looks because I'm being driven by old ideas, guess what? That creates the conflict in my mind. That creates the unmanageability in my mind. And before you know it, I'm walking around with an attitude and an emotion, the guiding forces of our lives. And see, these belief systems are the things that we need to challenge in our recoveries. The way we think and see things. This is why we need each other. This is why I need a sponsor who has clarity. This is why I need to run stuff by the guys in my, as Ralph always says, my road dogs before I make decisions. Why? Because sometimes my decision, I'm like a racehorse. I got blinders on. I can't see outside the blinders. and I make decisions based in self that continue to get me in harm's way, that continue to hurt people. This ain't easy, this stuff sometimes, you know? Sometimes easy, sometimes hard, right? So that 10th step, stop when these things crop up. Not if they're going to crop, when they crop up, right? I got to pause. I got to stop. I got some direction. Ask God, we even thank God that I can even see the thing that's going on in my life right now. Talk to my sponsor about it. Bring it to God and ask God to take away the character defect. Make amends if necessary. And then resolutely turn my thinking mind to helping others. Problem solved. I talked to my sponsor. I prayed on it, maybe wrote on it. Move on. Stop digging it up. Stop digging it up. To get rid of this stuff promptly without regret. I don't throw stuff in a great illustration. When we moved a month ago, I pulled up 2 dumpsters to my house. I was in a house for 25 years. And my wife was looking at all the stuff I'm throwing in a dumpster. She was like, wait a second. I'm like, no. If we haven't worn it, ate it, looked at it, felt it, touched it in the last year and a half, it's gone without regret and promptly. Well, that's what God is asking us to do with our life. When these things crop up, right? Get me back into the light. Get me back into the light, right? I love the effect produced by God, and I love the effect produced by having a spiritual experience and living in the sunshine. It feels good to have that sun beating down on you. Nothing's worse than being in a dark hallway, right? I know that too well, right? So here we are. We have 10, we have 11, and then 12, right? Helping others is the foundation stone of our recoveries. The joy of living is the key to everything, One of the topics, if you guys are, me and Tommy, the joys of being a good man. What does that look like in your life? The joy of being a good man. Whether you got a year or 40 years, it doesn't make it. What does it look like to have joy in your life? Restless, irritable, discontent. Now, discontent sounds like I'm not satisfied, but discontent has another definition. That means I can't experience joy. You could put a baby, I got 2, 3 grandkids, 4, 2, and 1. You could put them in my hands and I would still not feel the joy of that. Thank God, God has taken that away from me. Thank God I could have an emotion of love and consideration. And I'll end on this. When I was working the steps, as I came out through the steps, I was given a consideration. Kind of 6 and 7 stuff. This guy, Bill, looked at me and, I've had other sponsors that said the same thing in different language, but do I look at the people in my life, the situations in my life, and the circumstances of my life through the lens of a character defect or through the eyes of God? Pray on that one. Because I've looked at everyone in my life through anger, fear, resentment, you name it. I've looked at situations in my life, the things I've been through in my life with regret and self-pity and all that stuff. And what this process is asking us to do is to start to look at things with love and tolerance, and compassion and forgiveness, right? And we do this one day at a time. I know it's a cliche, but really, it's all we have is today. So I hope your day, and I hope my day, is a day of being in the light and enjoying this beautiful world and enjoying your sobriety and your families and your friends and everything that we get, because we get a lot in here, right? Don't toss it away for that foolish idea that this time it's going to be different. Thank you.
Woo! Guys, unmute yourself and just give
Uncle Jimmy.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Uncle
Thank you,
Jimmy.
Thank you so much.
Let's
Jimmy.
go.
Thanks,
Jimmy
Jimmy.
from Jersey
Awesome.
dropped the
That was an
bomb.
amazing talk.
Yeah, man,
Thanks,
guys.
Uncle Jimmy.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Oh my God, I've got my hair on my arms several times. Just such a vivid description of both ends of our world here, of what it can be, life can look like consumed with self, and what life can look like if we carry the heart of a servant. He made a wonderful description at the beginning of his talk about, the big book says if our ideals are grounded in a power greater than ourselves, we can recreate our lives. And what does that look like? He gave us a series of questions based on the bedevilments, and he gave us, a lot of us on this call, zingers this morning, questions we don't want to ask ourselves. And then how long can you hold your breath, gentlemen? How long can you be in a 12-step spiritual path and not engage in these 12 steps? And then his talk about going from the light to the darkness, back to the light, and these new stations in our spiritual evolution, and how that darkness sometimes is mandatory for us to go to that next level of faith or trust, and then it creates a sacredness. Not that we want to suffer, but there is a sacredness to the struggle because of the impact it has on our character development. And then he said something that I know hit hard with some of us on this call. The parts of ourselves that we don't look at rule us. And if I'm assigning blame, guys, I can't exist with the heart of a servant. It's not going to happen. I'll be consumed with self. I will filter life through this thing right here. And that's not a way to live. And to the untrained eye, attainment of material things is the answer to my problems. I'm not going to call names out, but I know there are guys on that call this morning that believe that. And your actions back that up, guys. God uses us without our permission. Amen. Jimmy, brother, thank you, sir. I can't wait to see you in a couple of weeks. We're going to have a blast. And also, Jimmy, I don't know if you're going to be here the Thursday before. We're doing a little gathering at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday at a recovery center here. It's going to be Ralph and a bunch of people from all over the country. If you are, just please reach out to me. You're more than welcome. Guys, there's going to be 20 of us on this call that are going to that retreat. And, we're all gathering at the Longleaf Recovery Center. We're going to get pizza, nothing formal. We're just going to kick it. We're going to kick it on Thursday night from about 6:30 to 8 o'clock to 8:30. Anybody want additional information, please reach out to me. You don't have to be going to the retreat to come fellowship with us on Thursday night. But again, guys, let's hold a space of love and for all of us, for each other, as we end this meeting with a moment of silence and get on with our Sundays. Jimmy, thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's have a few moments of silence and get on with our Sundays. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.